Welcome to the Future Champions webinar with Ian Bateman. He has over 30 years experience with football. His experience includes the Bobby Charlton School of Soccer, the Bolton Wanderers Football Club, and he's now with the FA. Ian, thank you for joining us.
No, absolute pleasure. Great way to start my Sunday.
So can you tell us a bit about your journey in football and in coaching?
Yeah, no, there's probably three key areas really. Yeah, thanks. I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on today. It's really good to share some of this stuff. Started off three areas really. Started off at the Bobby Charlton School when I was kind of around 20. Had sort of 10 or 15 years working there, which was a great experience as a young coach to, work with loads and loads of young players in England, but also work in lots of countries across the world. And then I've spent 10 years at Bolton Wanderers in the academy there. Start working as a part-time coach initially, but then ended up as assistant academy manager, which was a really, really good time. And now I'm working at the FA and have been there for another 10 or 11 years. Generally the main, working mainly in coach development, but also working with one or two teams, which has been really interesting.
So can you talk to me about today's topic is experiences of player development. And I guess your first experience would have been with the Bobby Charlton Soccer School. For those people who don't know what that is, can you explain what the Bobby Charlton School of or Soccer School is?
Yeah, I mean, it was set up by Bobby Charlton probably about 35 years ago. It was actually after the World Cup in 1978, and he'd seen all these. Argentina had done really well, and he'd seen all these fantastic players. And at that point, there wasn't in England, the football was mainly schools football. There was no grassroots football particularly. There certainly wasn't any academies. There wasn't any community programs. So Bobby came back and thought, this wasn't right. For people that don't know, younger sort of listeners today, Bobby was, if you classed him now, he'd be like a Ronaldo. He'd be like Lionel Messi. He'd won the World Cup with England. He'd won the European Cup, along with Pele, Franz Beckenbauer. Those three were like the really, really great players. So Bobby set a school up initially in Manchester, but then it spread to go all over the world, which was phenomenal, really. And out of that dropped lots of other things. So as a young coach, it was one of the main opportunities. I was probably quite fortunate to live in Manchester where the school was operating. But we had, it was interesting. We got players from all over the country came, players in fact from all over the world came. And interesting enough, just as I started, David Beckham. So each year we'd have a skills competition, which covered different aspects of the game. And David won it. I mean, that's been pictured with Bobby as I think he was about 11 at that point, and his prize was to go across to Barcelona for a week, where which was just a phenomenal experience for him. But at that point, Manchester United, he wasn't really on Man United's radar. So David, that was his. Suddenly, then they became aware of him. By the time he was 14, he'd signed to United. So I think what the school gave him was some opportunity for him to come and get noticed. And similar to Stephen Ireland, so Stephen Ireland's sort of coming to the end of his career. He was at Stoke, I think, last year, but had some time at Man City. He won the skills competition, interesting enough, when he was about 9 or 10. And they were competing against boys that were and girls that were far older, up to 16 years old. But the interesting thing with both of these characters, and I think it really links into what we're talking about today, is that they came second in the competition the year before, and then went away, practiced, individual practice, and then came back the next year and absolutely smashed the field apart. So they had to take part in sort of 5 or 6 tests under some pressure. They realised they'd come close. Just being close wasn't good enough. They had to be a perfectionist. They had to win the competition. They came back the following year. David got the top score at that time. And then when Stephen came along a few years later, probably 6 or 7 years later, then he smashed the score that David had done. And they did that as sort of 10 or 11-year-olds, which was just phenomenal. But I think it started to tell you about, just about some of their psyche and what you need if you're going to be a professional footballer, the detail that you need to work at, and then kind of being able to deliver, go away and practice and then deliver under that real pressure. And you think it just, clearly David's been more high profile than what Stephen was, but both played in the Premiership, both international players. There's traits in there that I think would be really interesting for players of any ages and any standard of what you're playing at.
It's interesting that you mention that David wasn't identified by Manchester United before going to the school with Bobby Charlton. What do you think it was that changed in his development that allowed people to see what sort of footballer he would become?
Well, I think this is the point. It's about generating opportunities for yourself. The system was very different at that point, but certainly it was clear that he was a real standout player at the school. We had thousands of children coming to the school across different projects that we were running. Some years it was maybe 4,000 or 5,000 children. So to win, and everybody took part in the test. But you could see, I think the standout thing was one that he returned, having come so close that he returned. But then clearly, there was a talent there that is technically himself. And the tests were technical tests. Didn't really involve, weren't physical tests. The psychological bit, I guess, was around could you compete under pressure in the tournament. But, the fact that they did so well, the fact that they were so young and were like real standout players, the stats didn't lie. And I'm not really into stats back up what your eye sees. It's, they shouldn't drive what you're seeing. But clearly you couldn't argue with the fact that, they did so well in a pressure situation. The final was on the pitch at Old Trafford, prior to a game and with the crowd coming in. So, think about that. You've got to, I don't know, some of it was kind of ball control, shooting, passing, but you had to have the detail and you had to be able to do it under pressure. And that's what these players could do from a very, very early age. And
then you went as a coach to Bolton Wanderers Football Club. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, so we've had an academy program in this country now for just over 20 years, which was quite significant. So initially, players would sign schoolboy forms around 14 years old. And then 20 odd years ago, the system clearly wasn't probably producing as many players as what would have hoped for. So got the opportunity to go and work part-time at Bolton, which at that point, Bolton were kind of a team that were top of the Championship into the Premiership one year. They were yo-yoing in between. So it was great to be involved from the project right from the start, although on a part-time basis while I was still working at Bobby Charlton's. Gave me a chance to work with some elite players, which was terrific. And then we've had some success with people coming through. So interesting enough, through a couple of things, we had some links with Australia, which people, I don't know, might be aware of, might not be aware of. We thought quite differently. So at the time, Sam Allardyce was the manager, and he had really good links. So we had really good links with bringing players through. Currently, there's players here that people might recognise. I've been gone 10 years, so there's a group of players that were quite young at the time. So people like Aaron Moy. Aaron came over actually when he'd finished school, and was with us for a couple of years. Didn't really get up to the first team level. It happened about the time that we moved on. But Aaron had one being willing to move countries and come and live in a different place. Just shows the strength that he had mentally to come and move.
Can I ask you about Aaron in particular, because we talked about this early in the week? It wasn't the case that any player from Australia can go over at that age. You have to have, and he had to have some connection to England or to the UK.
Yeah, well, I think it's more European. So I think with Aaron, his mother was from the Netherlands. So that gave us, if you're an EU country, I guess that's about to change now with us dropping out the EU. But yeah, so Aaron had his mum was from the Netherlands, so that opened the door for us to be able to for him to come as a schoolboy basically. And I think it was the end of him being a schoolboy and then turning into being a scholar. So that was around about 16. And with the school, I remember there was a period where, because of the school year in Australia, it was slightly different. He would be in the club and around the club. Some days he was training with the reserves, you know, as a sort of 16-year-old, just travelling into the country. Funnily enough, we had Scott Jameson with us at the same time. So Scott's, you know, at Melbourne City at the minute. So he was, he'd never, you know, he kind of returned to Australia, but has made a career in Australia as football. So, you know, there's players that have come through, and Chris Basham in the top right-hand corner was a real slow burner. We had him as a scholar, so as a, you know, 16 to 18-year-old, played in the lower leagues, signed for Sheffield United, and right at the end of his career, he's ended up playing in the Premiership. And suiting, the thing with Chris is he suits a system that just works for Sheffield United, you know, and they're doing incredibly well. So we've got these players. So even, and what's interesting is work that we were doing, you know, with Aaron and with all these boys, it was probably about 14, 15 years ago that we were doing the work. And it's really interesting to see where the careers have ended up, you know, and as international players, as Premier League players, it's just incredible. But at the time, you just don't know what that journey is going to be. And you're just hoping that the players really grasp those opportunities, as clearly these fellas have done. But
and there were other players as well, wasn't there, during that time?
Yeah, and I'm conscious, you know, especially some of the younger people on the call won't recognise these guys. But the story here is, so Kevin Nolan was released by Liverpool at 14 years old. He was a centre forward. He ended up being the club captain under Sam Allardyce. You know, he's been a manager now at clubs. He's come right through his career. You know, being released at 14, but was too small. And interesting enough, was like a late birthday in the age groups. So there's no surprise that and in fact, all these players. So Joey O'Brien was in the middle. He was an Irish player, played for West Ham. People might remember, as did Ricardo Vaz Tê. So Joey, again, young birthday, physicality at 16. There was just no meat or muscle on him at all. And he was probably, we'd seen him playing in, and he wasn't the top player in the fixture you were seeing, but there was something about him that you thought, no, we need to take a chance on this guy. And then he started filling out at 17, at 18 he's in the first team, at 19 he's playing in the Europa League. It was, you know, things start to happen quickly, but you've just got to give these players time to mature. Ricardo, you know, Portuguese player, played for the Portuguese national side in the end, and again couldn't find a team in Portugal. Came on a trial. He just literally appeared, scored 3 goals in about 10 minutes, and you know, we signed him there and then. But made an absolute massive impact straight away. But these guys had you know, terrific careers, all came through the system. And there's others. We've got Kyle Bartley, who's at West Brom, been at Arsenal at the minute. You know, we've got Ashley Fletcher, who's at Middlesbrough, was at West Ham a couple of years ago. We did have quite a production line of players that's made it into the Premier League, which I think a lot was down to having a manager that was really open-minded and allowed the players to come through and flourish. So being given that opportunity, the manager wasn't afraid to put them into the team. And as you know, being involved as, you know, around the academy, you needed the first team manager to give people chances. And what we found was, if they got the chance, we'd prepared them right, that if they were given a chance, they really made the most of that opportunity that came along.
So we have our first question that we're going to ask the participants. And I'm mindful that some people are having trouble logging on at the moment, and they're sending me messages. They'll keep trying. So
okay.
So the first question that you wanted to ask, particularly the footballers, what position do you feel comfortable to play in?
This is around the number of positions as well. You know, it's probably not just being in one. Well, yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what the guys come up with.
the question is actually how many positions are you comfortable in playing in?
That's
So
correct, yeah.
we'll launch the poll. So people are starting to answer that poll. What's so important about this question, Ian?
When we look back, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, Kevin Nolan came to us as a centre forward and ended up, making a career as a centre half. Joey O'Brien, we watched him as a central midfield player, played most of his career, at full back or as a centre back. Vaz was different. He was an out and out striker all the way along. You look at Man City at the minute, and Bernardo Silva can play on right wing, left wing. He'll play centre forward. He'll play centre midfield. I think the fluidity of football going forward and teams going forward, players need to be able to play in different positions. One, to give flexibility for the coach, but secondly, you don't know. So when Joey O'Brien had played all this time as a central midfield player, and his first opportunity came when we were short of a fullback, but because he was fast, because he could, he had the way we played. We wanted fullbacks to get the ball into the box really, really quickly. Joey could do that. So suddenly you've got key traits that he could do. So his first game, first time he'd really ever played fullback was in the Premier League, which is crazy. But but can we? So the learning as a coach, and I think as players is, you need to be prepared for every eventuality. So you really limit yourself if you've just got one, if you're just comfortable in one position. And then one, it gives you more opportunities, perhaps, if to play in different teams, if you can play different positions. But you never know, when your big chance arrives, you might actually be required to play in somewhere that's a little bit, which you don't want it to be unique. You don't want it to be the first time. And I mean, we've had it with teams we've had before. We've had probably players that we've anticipated. We think they're going to be centre halves or defenders, but they need to sort the feet out. They need to be able to deal with the ball coming from different directions. So playing them as central midfield players, maybe playing them as as fullbacks, just to give them different opportunities. I think the French team that won the World Cup, I read something last week that their two fullbacks had played most of their football as centre halves, but still had ability to were really, really mobile. So this is the current world champions. We're taking players out of the main position and placing them in a secondary position to play in a particular system. And that they were very much a counter-attacking team in the World Cup. They had real pace in Mbappe and people. So, they wanted fullbacks that could defend as a priority. So, some coaches will think differently. So how can you prepare yourself to be absolutely ready for what the coach might have up his sleeve? And I think coaches are getting really clever now and thinking in different ways to solve some of these solutions.
The majority of the people that voted said that they're comfortable in three different positions. 22% said two, and then I guess 22% said four, and then 22% roughly said five or more. But the majority said three positions. Does that sound about right to what you're seeing at the moment?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. We look at, and I think it's understanding. Can you, if you're a winger, can you play at fullback? If you're fullback, can you play at winger? If you like playing on the right side, you look at Man City. They play with inverted wingers, so right foot on the left hand side, left foot on the right hand side, and the reason they do that is because they know, they want balls that's going to, in swing from wide positions. It's probably easier to control, if they're under pressure and they've got to receive it on a safe side or away from the defender, they're receiving on the good foot, or the best foot. So it just opens up more opportunities. Now, 5 years ago, I think people would have really challenged that. Or if you're playing for a different team, they might play, Liverpool still try and get players really high up the pitch, but actually they probably want their wide men to do something different. So, you don't know so being able to play on opposite sides of the pitch, I think is really handy. And then being able to play, if you're a young player at Man United and you're a midfielder and attacker, you would be expected to play anywhere in that top six of the players, in the midfield or the attack, and get used to playing in those different areas.
I want to take you to your current position, which is
Yeah.
You are part of the FA and you do coach education, but you also work with the England, some of the England teams. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, exactly. So my main role, I run I'm part of a team. I'm in charge of a group of fellas that go into the professional academies. So we've got 20 coach educators that work across all of the academy program. So the boys program in the professional game. So, and we try and help the coaches within the clubs get better. So we share some messages from the FA, similar to what we're doing today. And then try and get the coaches better on the grass. So, this is from the pre-academy, coaches working in pre-academy from 5 or 6 years old, up to the, people working with the under 23s, whether that's at Accrington Stanley or whether it's at Liverpool. We work with all those coaches. So, we write up the awards as well. So along the A license, the advanced coaches awards, and down to sort of the level 3 and level 2 awards, we have an impact on that. Goalkeeping, futsal, football, that all comes within our remit. So it's really exciting to be involved doing that, and that's the day job. And then what I've been doing for the last for 10 years, I was involved with the partially sighted team, and as well, so that was doing futsal and also with the mainstream futsal team as well. So I think there's stories from all the squads. So the partially sighted team, they went from being, well, when we started, we couldn't get out the group stages in competitions. The last 2 World Cups, they've got to the final. So these guys are second in the world. And their story is they have sighted keepers, fully sighted keepers. So Dylan on the number 1 there. He's probably the 3rd best keeper in England at the minute, and would play with the senior team. So they're fully sighted. But the rest of the guys, they've all got a story to tell. One guy had his eye shot out. So you can read into that what might have happened as a teenager. Some of these guys started with perfect sight, but then through the teenage years, young adult years, they start to lose the sight. Some people were born, with problems that they couldn't see out of one eye. So, really interesting group. A lot of the group have been together now for 6 or 7 years. They range in ages. The youngest guy is 16, up to the oldest, who's just retired, was just in his early 40s. But we'll talk about Steve later. But I think what the interesting thing for me is these guys have it tough. Things are tough on a daily basis. So the football becomes a welcome relief. So when they come together as England players on camp, or if they're on camp or if they're in tournament, then they come, they're England players. So they have a massive support staff around them. The guys in grey are support staff, and in there you've got psychologists, you've got physios, you've got a full-time doctor, you've got a goalkeeper coach, you've got 2 outfield coaches. They get the full support as any FA team would, England team would have. And they're a really tight group. And why that's important, I think that, understand sometimes about being with your mates and the strength. If you can get, a lot of these players have had have been together for 6 or 7 years. They've all, had most have had the debuts. I've been fortunate enough to give them the debuts. So I think that increases the bond between the coach and the player. But when it gets tough, and I know we've got to 2 World Cup finals, but at each point in each tournament, there's been a time where you've really had to roll your sleeves up and dig in together. And that's what this group have. They're a real tight unit. And I think they're tight because when they come together, they've got these shared experiences on a daily basis. But when they come together as a team, it makes them really, really tight. And I think you see that in other teams, and maybe not so much now. When you've got groups of people that come from the same area, that go to the same school, have been through the same sort of experiences, that can really bond people together, and it becomes, it can become unbreakable if you've got it that tight, and it can really help, especially when the time gets tough, which always does. You know, in any season, there's going to be ups and downs, and that's when you need to stick together. And that's what these lads do. It's never a straightforward run. It's like a roller coaster. There's good bits, there's bad bits, and they do stick together really, really well.
The other team that you work with is
Yeah.
the futsal team, the English futsal team. Now, I was lucky enough to go and watch them play in December in St George's Park, and they are certainly a cut above the other teams in the UK at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, I think in the UK, definitely we're a stretch ahead of Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. I think that the challenge has been for us is I mean, we're ranked around 50 in the world. We got up to about in the 40s, high 40s, not so long ago, and then we've dropped a bit. But again, you know, this group has got aspirations to be, you know, a top 20 in this world. If we can get to that point, it's quite ambitious, but potentially is achievable. I think the thing with these guys is they have to. We've got some lads that will go abroad and play as professional futsal players. But even the guys that play part-time in England, but then play for the national side, they are part-time athletes, but they have to act so professionally. So they have to get the food right. They have to train right by themselves. They have to get the club training right. They have to be thinking about the right things all the time. So when we do perform against, you know, a top 15 side, so, you know, last year we played against Poland, we played against Croatia, we played against France, who are all sort of top in Europe. They would be certainly top 10 sides and would all qualify for the Euros. We've managed to push those teams really, really close. So these fellas thrive on the competition, and realise that actually by one way of getting better is playing against the best teams that we can go and find, to really test themselves. And as coaches, we find out what works, who rises to that challenge. But the players don't fear this at all. They want the challenge. They want the battle. They want to be playing. Croatia has a guy that was playing for Inter Movistar, who's like one of the best players in the Spanish league. So they want to go toe to toe with these sorts of fellas just to see how far they can push themselves and improve as best they can. So, you know, we have to support them through that. If the challenge is going to be really, really high, then as coaches, we've got to really help them as best we can, make sure that they're ready for battle when we go into that. And support them when it might not go right. So against France, we play a double header. First game, we lose 1-0, you know, and got really, really close. Against Poland, we're leading games. But in the second game when we played them, we've had a bit of a struggle. And that might be down to fitness. It might just be down to picking yourself up for the second game. It's really tough, you know, or maybe we surprise one or two people, I don't know. But there's a lot of controllables that the players can control in their day-to-day lives, and it is hard for them. You know, they've got full-time jobs, you know, and then they've got to train on an evening. So just to get your hydration and your food right is a real challenge. And I think, you know, we used to have that the same with the schoolboy players that came in. You know, finishing school, getting some food in before your trains, when you're going to eat after training is absolutely critical. So you're ready for the next session. Then you can give your next session, you know, the best that you can be. But in that continuous recovery, load up again, and then go into your next training session, go into your next game. You've got to have a real professional attitude around it to make it work.
And one of those people that has that professional attitude that you've identified is Steve Daly.
Yeah, so Steve, people won't know Steve. He's one of the partially sighted guys. He's actually the most capped English player in any sort of format, and he's just retired. But I mean, the thing about him is absolute leader. So go back to the Kevin Nolan thing. A real leader of people. And what do I mean by that? You know, sees the positive in things. Is willing to have an opinion on the pitch. Demonstrates. You know, I've never seen him get sent off. He's really well. He did 2 handballs, which was really, really unfortunate at that time. But you know, that was part of the sight issue. But I think the big thing with him, the big moments in games when you've needed a goal or you've needed to see a game out, he's the man that you turn to. You know, he's the man that's pulled something out the bag, and these top players can do that. You know, whether it's a cup final, whatever it is, they generally have that ability to pull something special. The other thing that really intrigued me was like he's saying in his last 30 caps, he's probably learned more about the game, you know, than when he did early in his career. And I think that's something about us as a futsal nation, which is another story. But you know, we're still in our infancy. But he's learnt more about the game, but he's still learning. You know, he's right at the end of his career, and even in the last tournament, in the last game, he's saying, "I'm in situations here that are slightly different than what I've faced before," and that's what happens. We never know everything about the whole game. It's always evolving, and Steve's evolved with it as things have moved on. But you know, what an attitude! Even in his late in his 30s, he's still the fittest guy in the room. He's winning the yo-yo test, which tells me that away from the pitch, away from competition, he is, you know, he's absolutely doing the right things. He would train with sighted players, so it put him on the edge all the time. He was always striving to be the best. He was striving for that gold medal. We didn't manage to get him the gold medal, which is a shame, but that's, you know, I think he'd have settled for two world silvers, definitely.
Yeah. So then the next question that you wanted to ask is, how many games do you play each season? So we'll ask that poll question.
We're discussing this quite a bit, and it's really interesting. I think back to, you know, when I was, yes, there's some big numbers there. It'd be really, I don't want to really give the game away here, I don't think there is a right answer and a wrong answer. I know, you know, as a young boy, I was playing nearly every day. I think my games program was maybe around about 5 games a week, whether that was for school, for my grassroots team, for my county team, or, you know, or for a club. So, yeah, you know, or even when I'm saying that, a game might be sort of an in-house game at school. So there was probably 5 match day opportunities and a week. Now that this is going back some time, you know, it's 40 years. There was some problems with that, and then when the academy program came in, it shifted totally. The shift in games went a lot lower. Is the scores coming back in, Stuart?
So the majority of people, about 40%, are playing 30 games, and about 30%, 70% are playing between 30 and 40 games, which is indicative of an Australian season. It's normally 21 games for a season, and maybe they play another 9 games for school. So they're probably looking at about 30 to 40 games. And I guess that was the trend, say 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but the trend is now changing, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I mean, something we're pushing with the academies, and we've driven through really, we've managed to get this going quite well, actually, is the academy program. In some instances, when we looked at it, some teams were only playing like 20 games a year. And then when you looked at the game minutes that actual players were getting, the game minutes were shared. Game minutes were shared, which was a problem. And, you know, so players were in effect playing about 10 games a season when you looked at everything that they were doing, which clearly wasn't enough. So, you know, we've started to push now. So we're pushing different formats of games. When we're looking at, we're chatting with the Spanish Federation last week. Their minimum really is around 55 games a year across different formats. And as a younger player, as a 10 or 11-year-old, lots of friendly games, fewer really competitive games. But then it starts to flip. By the time they're 16, the games are becoming really competitive with fewer friendly games, or friendly development games, I'd say. So it becomes more about winning later on than what it does when you're younger. And it's like on a sliding scale.
But not all games have to be in the same 11-a-side format, do they?
No, I mean, this is something we've picked up from the Brazilians and the Portuguese and the Spanish. Brazil, they have a twin track program where, you know, players up to 14 are playing 1 futsal game a week, 1 football game a week, and then they're training sort of 2 futsal sessions, 2 football sessions. So, you know, they're having 6 hits a week, but you know, they're playing different formats. So we're really trying to push that. Futsal's heavy on the agenda, you know, and recognising what you get from those different formats. I think the important thing is to put the jersey on and go toe to toe with somebody else. And And we're trying to push that through grassroots now, where rather than training on a Wednesday night, you'll go and have an additional game against the local team, and you just play, and the coaches can recognise what they're going to get from these games. So suddenly your games program the numbers of games is rocketing up. The Spanish as well. And we're not trying to be Spain or Brazil. We're trying to take the best of what they offer. So, and I think it's when you look back at what players enjoy those game experiences. So that's one thing. So as coaches, I think we need to understand that. I think as learning opportunities, the research we're doing is the players find those as the best learning opportunities. Go back to the England national futsal team. The players go, no, when we play against really tough teams, we learn lots about ourselves and about each other. And this is critical for us to develop and to move forward. So, we'd looked at Valencia. Valencia have over 100, and I think there were about up to 120 opportunities for players to put on the strip and go toe-to-toe with another team in a year across different formats, which is just phenomenal. But when, again, and the other thing they had, interestingly enough, was their practices always had goals and finishing in them, which is the really hard stuff. So practice the hard stuff all the time, rather than where you're underloaded high up the pitch. And that's what games gives us. And, some of those, I think how they pick the games. So some of those games could be games, and Liverpool do this really well in their programme. Some of the games they know they're going to win quite comfortably. Some of the games they know they're going to lose, or it's going to be really, really tough. Some they know are going to be 50-50 games. So you've got to work, as a coach, what you're going to get from it. If you're a striker that wants to get loads, if it's the game you're going to win loads of, you're going to get loads of shots, which becomes a bit of a finishing practice. The game, and so that could be against, a grassroots team. If you're an academy, you could go and play a team a year above that's physically much stronger for you. Now, how are you going to cope with that? Is it going to, individually, how will that affect the players? How can they compete? But really thinking it through, and the players understand it. And not, sometimes you might tell the players it's going to be really, really tough. Quite often I think they know, whether it's going to be easy or tough. Sometimes you might share as a coach what you're going to go after, but I think it's just being in these different circumstances. Interesting enough, Man United take their under-16s away to Germany every Christmas to play in an indoor tournament, which is fast and furious. It's live on television. They have around 3,000 or 4,000 people in the arena. It's indoors. It's not futsal. It's played off boards. It's with a normal football. But they know that it really sharpens the players up for the rest of the season. That time of year where there's probably a little bit of a lull. It's indoors, so they know it's going to get played. And I think this is the critical bit. Players need exposure, and they love playing. I think if we all think back to the best, what are our memories as you don't remember too many training sessions, but you do remember games, and you really remember the moments within those games.
You wanted to talk about Max Kilman as well.
I don't know if people are aware of Max. He was on the bench yesterday against, they were playing Arsenal. Was it Arsenal? Yeah, they played Arsenal yesterday. He was on the bench. Max is really interesting case. So, and I think, so Max plays for Wolves at the moment. He's on the bench most weeks. He's had 3 or 4 appearances. He played against Liverpool at Anfield around Christmas time. Played against United in the Carabao Cup, the League Cup. So he's in the first team squad, and Wolves do have quite a small squad. Max's background was he was at Fulham as a schoolboy. Best player when he was under 11, under 12, and then didn't grow. At under 14, they released him because he couldn't get around the pitch. It was to physicality, really. Too small, couldn't run. When you chat, we've got some webinars on the FA Learning website, and we interviewed Max a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying about that he couldn't get around the pitch, but again, when he couldn't get around, he had to sort his feet out. Anyway, he couldn't get a club up to being 16. At 16, he ended up at Maidenhead, which are part-time team playing in the conference, which is the level below the Football League. So kind of the 5th division, if you like, in England. So Max was, by that point, he'd started to grow a little bit. So as a 16-year-old, he was kind of in a conference club, which is quite rough and tumble, really aggressive. He was a defender by trade, or played either fullback or centre half. At the same time, his dad is in fact Russian, and under Russia they play a lot of futsal. He got him into a futsal team in London. So he kind of had his own twin track program of playing futsal on a Sunday, playing for Maidenhead on a Saturday, training in the week, and then we picked him up through the England futsal program. He's had 25 England futsal caps, so he's played in European qualifiers, World Cup qualifiers. And then at 21, Wolves come along. They've seen him playing for England. We're quite curious about him, about what he was doing, and took a chance of him on the end of deadline day. And he's been there for a couple of years, and he's just signed another contract for another couple of years. So, again, he's our very own twin track, and we've got one or two others that are bubbling away that have played in the 19s futsal program. That one guy's now at Sheffield United. We've had one lad playing in the Welsh under 21s team that's been through another program in Wales. So this is starting to happen. But Max now is 6'5". He's left-footed centre half, and although people probably won't have heard of him, he's probably English left-footed centre halves that have got a real ability to play with the ball. So the way England are trying to play at the moment, and playing out from the back, if he does get a run of games, he's someone that we could see, really, he could still yet make it into the England football team as well as playing for the England futsal team. But it just sort of, we had quite some time in Max when he was playing his England games. He was, when we look at the stats, not only did he, he's not what people probably think of a futsal player. People think of the small players, the busy players. Well, actually, when you play against these top teams, they're big. France were full of players that were 6'3", 6'4". Max sort of fills that bill. But on the stats that we had, he was the most, not that he didn't give the ball away, but he had an impact. So he would create goals, he would stop goals, he rarely gave away goals. So he was our best player, and he was 19, 20 years old, and he probably had like a real laid back style, but anyway, that's really helped him going forwards.
We have our first question from one of the participants, and we got this earlier in the week. This is Sam Klein, and this is his question.
My name's Sam Klein from Brisbane Roar Academy, and I was just wondering, when scouting young athletes, what is the first thing you look for?
So that's the question.
Yeah.
When scouting young athletes, what is the first thing you look for? Good question.
Great question, Sam. Absolute cracker. Yeah, I think it depends on the coach. For me personally, I'd look at how people retain the ball and how they deal with the ball, as opposed to some other coaches might go for physicality, that they're wanting players to run in behind. Now that might go down to their own philosophy about how the team they're wanting them to play. But I think to be a top player at the moment, the technicality of if you can't deal with the ball, if you can't deal with the ball under pressure, then you've got no chance. And that's absolutely critical. So for me, I'm looking at ball retention, but then it's a bit more than that. What are the players doing before they get on the ball? I'm looking to see where are they looking as the ball's coming from? How do they create the space to get on the ball? Because it might be that they just can't manipulate the space to be able to get on it in the first place. Are they happy to receive it under pressure? When they get on the ball, are they landing on it and facing forwards? So, are they thinking forwards? Are they looking forwards? And then can they play forwards? And I think they're three critical things for me. If players are demonstrating that's absolutely critical. And personally, that's what I'd be going for.
So our next question is, what is the most important area for your development? Which I guess leads on to the question you've just asked. So we'll run that poll just quickly.
Yeah.
And it's now launched. And why is this question important to you, Ian?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it a lot at the moment when we're watching teams in the academy program here. We hear a lot about systems, and when you watch, the football programs and matches being analysed, you hear a lot about systems. I think what we've really got to get and sort of group tactics. I think for me, and I think with player development, we're missing the point. The key bit here is around, you know, the individual technique of players. And when you look at, you know, the great teams at the minute, it comes down to, you know, you look at Kevin De Bruyne was outstanding the other day, but actually it's his individual technique that how he gets out of pressure, how he gets on the ball, the time, and maybe more than technique, but his individual tactics, the timing of his runs, you know, where's he learnt those? That's the critical bit. And I think if we're developing individuals, that's the bit that we have to focus on. And that's, you know, and that's not a team. That's as players, that's in your control. You know, I think sometimes, you know, we can control that, but I'm not sure. Sometimes we get distracted thinking, oh, it's got to be about fitness and other sides of things. But actually, yeah, the individual tactics and the individual techniques that players have got is the key bit, because that's going to bring you through at the end of the day. And when things get tough, that's what's going to get you out of trouble.
So the results are through, and the question was, what is the most important area of your development? You've given a number of options: individual technique, team tactics, fitness, psychological, and social. The overwhelming majority, 64%, said individual technique.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think it's really good because, again, when you go back to, if we go right back to Bobby Charlton, the stories he told was around, you know, getting the ball and playing against the wall, you know, so he would go and play with his mates. But these top players, Wayne Rooney was the same. You know, when you read about these guys, they take themselves off on their own. They're practicing just then the ball and the wall, you know, getting the ball out the feet. Can they, you know, having a target on the wall, can he hit it from a close range? Can he hit it from further away? You know, can he get 3 out of 3, 4 out of 4, 5 out of 5? 3 out of 5 isn't good enough. I've got to get 5 out of 5. Can I do then with my left foot? Can I do it in one touch? And there's a real passion about the practice. Beckham was the same. You know, they had to drag him out off training. Fergie would take him out of training because he was doing too much, but he'd practice those free kicks over and over again after each session. So, which is really critical. I mean, we have a 4-corner model that we use at the FA. Clearly, you know, you need to be good in all of these 4 corners. You know, because if you're a nutcase, then probably in the social corner, and you're not going. It's really going to hinder your development if you can't get on with the rest of your group. And psychologically, you have to have a real resilience about you to get better and improve. And you've got to get around the pitch. You know, you've probably got to be quite quick. But I think the thing is recognising where your strengths are and where some of your, you know, where you need some help, and having super strengths. Absolutely, you know, recommend that. Know what you're good at. Really build on those super strengths. But at the same time, understand what your weaknesses are and start to build on those sort of things.
Fantastic. I have another question here from Ketis. He's a football player as well.
Hello, Ian. My name is Ketis, and I was wondering if you had any tips to help me prepare for trialling for a team I really want to make.
Ooh.
So top tips about trialling for a team you really want to make. And I guess going to that psychological part, the drive and the desire to really want to make a team sometimes can be your undoing, can't it?
Yeah, I think it can, but then there's certain things that you can make sure that you've got, you know, all sorted before you get there. So for me, I think it's the run up to the trial. You know, you leave nothing to chance. So, you know, making sure you've had enough rest beforehand is absolutely critical, so you're on top form. You know, making sure that you've done the necessary work, not the week before, but then in the months before that's coming. So are you physically in good shape? Have you done enough practice? You know, have you managed to get some sort of a post practice within all that? Because you don't want to be going from you know, if those sort of trials are happening pre-season, well, what are you doing before you get to the trial? You know, so you could be out with your mates playing some 1v1, 2v2 stuff, which could really, really sharpen yourself up. I think as well, I think if you know that there's somewhere that you want to go to, when you play that team, you may as well have a good game when you're playing against them. I think that's a really good way to stamp your mark, you know, so you can start thinking months and months in ahead if that's somewhere where you want to go. But it's also important about the sort of impact you make when that first time. You know, go and say hello to the coach. You know, go and make sure you shake his hand at the end and thank him for his time. and make sure that you've got some sort of impression and some sort of contact in there. And then it's not worldy passes. It's not about that. It's probably doing about the basics brilliantly, and making sure that your fundamental game's right. And sometimes that can be as eye-catching as someone smashing, 3 or 4 great passes, or, you might be reliant on somebody putting you in for a goal or whatever. So, doing the simple things right sometimes just and making the game look really easy. That's probably the best thing. But control what you can control. Make sure you've got everything you need. Make sure you've had the rest. Make sure you're in good shape. Make sure that you're ready. And be resilient. It doesn't. I think what's absolutely clear is that all players, even someone like Harry. I think Harry Kane got loaned out about 6 or 7 times. It takes you've got to be really resilient and keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going with this, because it doesn't always happen the first year, but second or third year, think back to David Beckham, make it happen, go away and do the practice, and then you'll be able to deliver when the time comes.
We have another question from Danny, a football player from a team you might be familiar with in Australia. Here's the question.
Hi, I'm Danny from Sunshine Coast Fire in Australia, age 9. This is my question. What are your top 3 coaching tips for my position, centre midfielder, that I can build through my junior career and into pro football? By the way, I've got a pretty good coach for the Sunshine Coast Fire, Tom Bateman.
Tom Bateman.
Hey, Tom Bateman. Wow. There you
go. For those who don't know, who's Tom Bateman to you?
Yeah, so Tom's my son. So a lot of he's out in Australia at the Sunshine Coast at the minute, having a whale of a time. I think he's got a better deal out of all this than what I have in a minute, being in the situation we're in just here. Yeah, so Tom's my son. And I think a lot of the stuff that Tom will be able to resonate with, a lot of the stuff we were talking about this morning around matches and sort of as a young player that in the teams where we sort of, as his dad in a grassroots environment and in other environments, trying to help him. So Danny, well, hope Tom's giving you some top tips. Tips for myself, I think as a centre midfield player, I think I touched on it before about, how do you get on the ball as a centre midfield player? You've always got to be able to get on the ball. So how do you, generate the space to get on the ball is critical. And I think the thing for me is when you get on it, can you try and get on the ball where you potentially can go forwards? And that doesn't mean, always facing forwards. You might be sort of facing towards your own goal, but can you shift the ball that on your next touch you are going forwards? And that's critical as a centre midfield player. I think, so and then can we look forwards after? If we can get on the ball to face forwards, great. If we can look forwards, brilliant. And then if we can play forwards and have those 3 things in your mind all the time, that's absolutely critical, because if you can crack that and watch the top players, that's what they can do. So, the other thing I'd say is watch the really, really good players. And it's quite different as, again, I'm a City fan, as you've probably told, but if David Silva is very different than Kevin De Bruyne, who's very different than Rodri now, or Fernandinho, who's again is different than Jordan Henderson. Now, they all have different traits, but they can, some are outstanding at dealing with the ball. Henderson, what energy he has to get around the pitch and organise and shape other players. So, technically, just make sure that you can get that right, and you'll be in a really good place. And hopefully, Tom can help you with 1 or 2 things there to get you on the right track.
You've talked about the personal identification of what you need to do as a player. Can you talk about this sheet here?
Yeah, no, this was just something that we did with Steve, who we talked about before. So just analysing yourself across 4 corners, of your own development. I think this is something that people can do for themselves. Something that we implemented at Bolton 15 years ago that the first team were doing, and it seemed to be quite new then. most academies now in England, well, they have to do this. So, you know, analysing yourself, and I think the other thing, and then reviewing this after a period of time. Should we do the question and?
Yeah, let's ask the question. So the question is, do you as a player have an individual plan for yourself? And I guess this is what you're talking about, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, and it is. It's something we've had around for some time. It's something that that we review. The clubs will Cat One Academy will review every 6 weeks, and it's not saying that everything is, you know, you do it and then you move on. But something, you know, you've probably got 1 or 2 things that you're really working on at a particular moment in time, and that could be a technical thing, but then it could be a psychological thing. The point is that it's been raised. It's been now when we first started doing this, the coach was really driving this. Then we started to look at the parents being involved in the process. I think we're at a point now, and we did this when I was at Bolton, that within sort of 6 months, the players were really good at this. So the players worked out what they really wanted to be going after, and so whether they were at training with us or playing with us, or whether they're playing for school, or whether we're, you know, they could even be playing basketball. But some of these things might be sort of transferable. That they had this running through their mind all the time, and were improving, and you know, it's just critical that you commit to it. Otherwise, you know, it's really tricky to pin down. And I think sessions have to be, for the coach, it's really tricky, because, you know, you'd be running, you could have 15 players in front of you. They've got, you know, their 2 or 3 things that they're going after. That's 40 odd individual plans, plus your team plan and all the rest of it. You know, you've got to be on your game as a coach to be able to process all that stuff. But there needs to be a review to this. Otherwise, it's just writing stuff down. So I don't know if people have stuff like that in place.
So the majority of people have said, yes, they do have a plan, but it's in their head. Some say that, you know, it's written down, and very few say that it's written down and reviewed. And I guess going from this webinar, that's probably a challenge that these players can take on.
Yeah, 100%. You know, if there's one bit of advice, and it's, you know, if people, and it doesn't have to be as detailed as what we've put up with Steve's, but just to have a think, you know what, this is really, really important. And then working out what it is that you need to do to get better in that particular aspect. You know, so if it is, you know, we're talking about the question about, you know, if you've been a centre midfield player and you're struggling to play the ball forwards, well, is it because when you land on the ball, you always land on it facing your own goal? Now, so then I could have my mum and dad thinking, oh, actually, I'm going to watch out for that in the game now. So let's see how many times, you know, get on the ball. How many times do I face my own goal? How many times do I actually manage to pass forward, having received it, so I'm not going backwards all the time, or I'm not going sideways? And we can start to, you know, we could go from being, you know, from 50%, we might be able to move that to 80%, which would be a real success. But because we've written it down and we're reviewing it from week to week and over a period of time, it can really give us some quick gains and gains that will be really useful for us.
Fantastic. So do you want to give a summary? I'm very aware that we're now on the hour, and we try to keep them to an hour. So that's perfectly timed, Ian. So do you want to give a summary?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the thing. I think, in summary, I think people have really, you need to maximise every opportunity that comes along, you know, so every game, every training session, you've got to, you know, every coach that you work with, you know, if you're a player, get as much information out of those coaches as you can, because, you know, they have got information for you and can help you. Similarly, as a coach, you know, maximise every game is a coaching opportunity for the players. You know, and every different type of format that you can be involved with, are you seeking to get the most out of it for all the players that are in front of you, you know? And every training session, every time you're together, you know, every time as a player you're just walking along the street, we'll take your ball with you and dribble the ball, and that's an opportunity that you've got just to have more touches on the ball. I think, you know, do the best, be professional in everything you do. you can eat the right. There's some things that you can pretty much do for free. So whether that's, going to bed at the right time, or getting enough rest before games, eating the right things, going away and doing the practice. So, and the professional bit is when people aren't watching, are you doing the right thing? And that's the difference. Then when we look at the top players that come through, they are absolutely obsessed, and they will be doing the right thing all of the time. And if you don't do that, actually when it comes to that, the time when you have that important trial, then that's probably when you're going to have problems, because something's been left to chance. I think the planning across four corners, again, that can be really simple, but have a little think about what are your super strengths, and really work on those super strengths. So if you're really, really fast, get even quicker. If you've got a really good shot, make that even better. But then actually be aware of other things that you need to develop. I think it's critical to really push yourself and play at the next level, and want that challenge. I think that's absolutely key. And in all this, I think the last three things, again, don't cost a thing. You don't really need help from anyone else. You've got to take responsibility for yourself in everything that you do. Nobody's going to do things for you. You can't expect people to do something. If people do things for you, it's a bonus. But you've got to take responsibility for your actions and be ready at the right time when that comes along, whether you're a coach or whether you're a player. Look, some things are not meant to be. Pick yourselves up, crack on. This isn't about facilities. Some of the best players at the minute, when you look at some of the Brazilians and what have you, come from backgrounds where they don't have facilities. Some of them don't even have shoes. So let's you've got to crack on, and you've got to make the most. And then the keep pounding the rock is, you don't know when the rock's going to break. So for Chris Basham, he's hit the Premier League right at the end of his career. Max Kilman, he would have been released. He's gone to play in the lower leagues, but actually he's got to be in the Premier League. He's become a Premier League player when he's 21, which is, which is quite unique. So you don't know when that opportunity is going to come, but you've just got to not give up, keep working hard at it, and you don't know what opportunities will come around the corner.
Ian, thank you so much for your time. It's been greatly appreciated. The time you've given has been amazing, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. Hope it's useful for people. If people do want to drop us a line, then absolutely welcome to do so, and we'll always help wherever we can, or certainly point people in the right direction. Okay.
Ian, thank you for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.